Multiple former and current members of the military and intelligence officials are now coming forward with concerns about the careless nature of airstrikes conducted in Syria by the United States military, which of course ended up killing innocent civilians. Now, the strikes were meant to target members of ISIS. However, we're learning more details about the careless nature of how these airstrikes were conducted, how they oftentimes relied on faulty intel, and of course, there seems to be an effort to either cover this up or avoid any accountability as a result of the civilian deaths that have occurred. Now, this was a pretty decent report by the New York Times, a lengthy one as well, and it gives you a lot of interesting details about what's going on. They write that a single top secret American strike cell launched tens of thousands of bombs and missiles against the Islamic State in Syria. But in the process of hammering a vicious enemy, the shadowy force sidestepped safeguards and repeatedly killed civilians. And this is the problem with the United States meddling in any type of conflict abroad. Oftentimes, they claim that their involvement is meant to protect national security, to defeat ISIS, or to protect civilians on the ground. But oftentimes, the opposite ends up happening. So this unit that they write about is known as Talon Anvil, and it worked in 3 shifts around the clock between 2014 and 2019. In the rush to destroy enemies, ISIS in this case, Talon Anvil circumvented rules imposed to protect non-combatants, otherwise known as civilians, of course, and alarmed its partners in the military and even the CIA by killing people who had no role in the conflict. Farmers trying to harvest, children in the street, families fleeing fighting, and villagers sheltering in buildings. And just how much of an impact did this so-called strike cell have? Well, quite a bit. So as the New York Times writes, Talon Anvil was small. At times, fewer than 20 people operating from anonymous rooms cluttered with flat screens. But it played an outsized role in the 112,000 bombs and missiles launched against the Islamic State, in part because it embraced a loose interpretation of the military's rules of engagement. And if you think that high-level figures within the military were the ones calling for the airstrikes and making these difficult decisions, turns out that is actually not the case. Some pretty low-level individuals were calling the shots, and that led to more civilian casualties. 4 current and former military officials say the majority of these strikes were ordered not by top leaders, but by relatively low-ranking US Army Delta Force commandos in Talon Anvil. And I have some more details later in regard to how they were able to find loopholes in certain rules for engagement in order to carry out these airstrikes, knowing full well that they could lead to civilian deaths. Before I get to that, Cenk,
yes,
are you surprised?
No, so there's a number of things to go over here. First of all, the exceptions they used, you will see, and the other tactics that they use look like they're borrowed from police departments across the country. So birds of a feather and all that. So was this authorized, and did people look away on purpose? The answer is almost definitely, okay? So what, in the past, generals used to order the strikes, then they wanted to speed it up and they moved it lower and lower down the list until this Delta team with sergeants were making the decisions. And how they step by other regulations is what Anna's gonna tell you. But the most important part of it is, guys, you're not going to get authorized to do that stuff unless it comes from up top, okay? And we know that for a fact for a number of reasons. People that were senior CIA officials complained they're killing way too many civilians and brazenly, right? People inside the Talon group complained. Other Air Force pilots sometimes wouldn't even drop bombs, saying, no, I'm not gonna drop bombs on these obvious civilians, right? And so these guys are totally out of control. And all these guys reported up the chain. These guys are out of control, they're killing civilians wantonly, right? And it goes up the chain to 2 people in particular, General Stephen Townsend, who commanded the offensive against ISIS. And when New York Times asked him about it, he's like, huh, interesting. No, we do a great job of protecting civilians.
Yeah.
And then General Joseph Votel, who was his commander and the head of Central Command, also, oh my God, we're the best in the business. I don't know what you're talking about. So obvious nonsense. They must have known. They clearly authorized it and didn't want to hear the details of all the murder of civilians that we were doing.
Yeah, in fact, let me fill in more details in regard to what you're talking about, because you're right. There was clearly an effort to avoid really changing the culture here. And it's evident in the way that the people at the higher ranks responded to the criticism. So Larry Lewis, a former Pentagon and State Department advisor who has viewed the Pentagon's classified civilian casualty data for Syria, said that the rate of civilian deaths was 10 times that of similar operations he tracked in Afghanistan. Lewis said that General Stephen Townsend, who Cenk had just referred to, who commanded the offensive against the Islamic State in 2016 and 2017, was dismissive of widespread reports from news media and human rights organizations describing the mounting toll. And Cenk, you brought up how reading about these details reminds you of some of the behavior among police and local police departments across this country. And in my opinion, it's no surprise that military culture bleeds into local policing in this country. I mean, we see how their military grade weaponry gets transferred over to local police departments. And with that comes a police culture. And as I read about the details in regard to how they skirted certain regulations, it also reminded me of common excuses that you'll hear from police officials and cops who end up firing at or just killing unarmed people in this country. So there were some regulations and rules in place, right? Rules of engagement, but they were able to circumvent them in a fascinating way. Delta operators were under enormous pressure to protect Allied ground troops and move the offensive forward, the former task force member said, and felt hobbled by the safeguards. So in early 2017, they found a way to strike more quickly. Self-defense. Talon Anvil began claiming that nearly every strike was in self-defense, which enabled them to move quickly with little second guessing or oversight, even if their targets were miles from any fighting. So they just said, all right, instead of referring to or labeling an airstrike as an offensive airstrike, we're just gonna say that it's a self-defense airstrike meant to protect Allied troops on the ground. And clearly that was meant to avoid having to do the necessary research, the necessary intel gathering before conducting that airstrike.
Okay, so think about it this way, guys. It's an unmanned drone that they're using. And sometimes they would kill people 100 miles from the front. So who are you defending 100 miles from the front when there are no US ground troops or any of our allies within hundreds of miles? And so you can't say self-defense of the drone, that makes no sense. You sent it over there to kill a target. So obviously the self-defense argument is complete horse crap. All you would need is one commanding officer to look at what they were doing based on all of the complaints to say this is ridiculous. The second thing you would see, which is also very similar to policing in America, is they have cameras on the drones, and right before they hit their target, they would move the cameras away, right? So you couldn't see the dead civilians. Now guys, think about it. If you were hitting the right targets, why would you move the camera away? And they noticed a pattern in a great number of hits. Right before they're about to kill civilians, they move the camera so you can't see the dead bodies. So obviously they're covering it up. More evidence. They would only use their first names. They would never use their last names or their rank, and they wouldn't wear their uniforms. Gee, I wonder if they were trying to cover up that they were doing something terribly, terribly wrong, and everyone knew it and didn't do a damn thing about it. And by the way, one of the things that I thought of as I'm reading through this is, now mind you, it started under Obama, okay? It started in 2014 and went to 2019. But you do see in the summer of 2016, they start to pick up the pace in killing civilians. And remember what Donald Trump promised on the campaign. He said, We should kill them and their families. And then you see in some of these, they have the footage in a lot of the videos before they started turning the camera away. In one case, clearly families fleeing, fighting, get on boats, they launch the missiles anyway. And you see women and children killed, torn apart, and their bodies floating down the river. Why would you fire at women and children fleeing, fighting? Why would you do that? Well, Trump told them to kill their families.
Now, Cenk, this story in the New York Times would not be possible if it weren't for people involved in military operations, members of the CIA coming forward and essentially blowing the whistle on what's taking place. And I want to connect some dots because remember, the United States government right now is fighting tooth and nail to extradite Julian Assange for publishing the leaks provided by Chelsea Manning. And the Apache helicopter strikes happen to be the center of that story. And as you're talking about all of this, it made me remember, why the Apache helicopter situation was so controversial. Obviously, it led to the death of Reuters journalists, so there's that. Civilian casualties, there's that. But that leak, regardless of how newsworthy it was, regardless of how controversial and disgusting, the military's behavior was in that case, it just continued. It just continued. In this case, we're learning about it in the context of these people talking to the New York Times. But if the US government could have its way, if they treated all cases similarly, couldn't they go after the New York Times for publishing this information right now?
100%. And so I was saying the same exact thing as I'm reading this story. This is almost exactly what Chelsea Manning and Assange did. Chelsea Manning leaked it. Now, but a lot of these people who are leaking are top level of officials in the CIA and the military. So they're not gonna get treated like Chelsea Manning, right? And the people that they leaked it to is the New York Times. So they're not gonna get treated like Julian Assange. But the reality is, it is nearly identical. So the Apache helicopter video in the Assange leak showed us killing civilians. This has video of us killing civilians and higher command doing nothing. And by the way, I mean, in this country, only the just get punished, right? Remember in that Apache helicopter video, the people who killed the civilians, none of them got punished, none of them. Only the people who leaked the story got punished. And same with the CIA torture program. No one who did the torture got punished. No one who destroyed the evidence got punished. Only the people who leaked the program got punished. So in this case, New York Times and the rest of the mainstream media should be incredibly careful about how they treat the Assange case. Because otherwise, if you put Assange in jail, there's no reason why they wouldn't come after the New York Times and reporters like this at a later time. Well, the precedent was set under Biden. Trump now took not only in these cases that are near identical, but then of course, Trump or anyone else, by the way, Republican or Democrat, could open the door further and go, well, then there were other colleagues at the New York Times who helped with this or that, or reported something I didn't like, put them in jail, put them in jail, put them in jail. So by the way, don't get me wrong. This is actually, and I criticize the New York Times all the time for being in favor of the status quo. This was a great article. This is great journalism. We love to see it. And we'd love to see a hell of a lot more of it and give credit to the New York Times for breaking this really important story. By the way, on the other hand, go turn on cable news and see if you'll ever hear this story reported.
No chance.
Right? Oh, and look, it's partly all of our fault. Like, we care, when I see
speak
civilians-
for yourself, it's not my fault.
No, I hear you. I'm saying as a society, right?
Yeah.
When I see civilians being killed in Syria, I care deeply about it. And to me, a poor kid floating down the river, bombed for no reason, is heartbreaking, and he's just as human as the rest of us. But a huge percentage in this country go, I don't really care. They're not us. They're some foreigners I can't relate to, so we killed a bunch of their civilians, so what, right? And by the way, and then in reverse, when our civilians are killed, a lot of people in other countries go, oh wow, American civilians were killed after they murdered civilian after civilian after civilian in endless conflicts. Now all of a sudden we're supposed to care about American civilians dying? I propose something radical, that we all care about each other. But unfortunately, that's not how a lot of American voters react, and that's definitely not how the majority of American media reacts. They think it's no big deal at all, otherwise they'd all be talking about it.
Right. And look, you can help mitigate the damage done by corporate media that tends to avoid covering these types of stories by sharing this video. Share it on social media with your friends, your family. It's really important for people to know what's really going on, not only with our military, but with the endless supply of taxpayer money that goes to defense contractors and the military, while Americans are being nickeled and dimed when it comes to social spending.
And I want to just give you one last instance of the over-the-top lies, so you know how outrageous this group was and how the military clearly knew about it and didn't do anything. So in one chat group, one of the members of this group writes, all civilians have fled the area. This is at 4 in the morning when they're about to bomb a village. And he says, all civilians have fled the area. Anyone left is an enemy fighter. Find lots of targets for us today because we want to go Winchester. Okay. Now, in reality, the video shows no one had fled. It's 4 in the morning. The houses were filled with women and children and men, of course, and they were completely lying in their reports about what had happened. They drop a bomb, and in that case, I believe 23 people. One report had it at 16 dead, another had it 23 dead, obviously pulling civilians out because they just bombed homes. And what you might be wondering is, what does going Winchester mean? It means expending all of the drone's missiles and 500-pound bombs. If you go Winchester, you're gonna kill everyone on the ground where you're hitting them. And that was the point of this group. Kill them all, combatants and civilians. And then later, the United States military will pretend to be outraged at terrorists who kill civilians. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.